They want us to mix, not only on the job, in our backyard barbecues, in our wedding ceremonies. The message is mix, mix, mix.
We're going to find out many things about sharing with others.
I've been learning what the American alt-right believes by examining speakers at Richard Spencer's recent NPI conference. In this video I look at white nationalism and a man called Jared Taylor, who is America's leading advocate for racial segregation. Taylor combines nostalgia for the Confederate South with a utopian vision for a new American society modelled wholesale on South Africa.
I stand absolutely by my view that the United States, up until just a few decades ago, was consciously established as an outpost of Europe and not as a grab bag, as some sort of entity which is really up for grabs to whoever one can come here.
Taylor runs the American Renaissance website, whose stock and trade is tales of American decline brought about by multiculturalism. He's also spent the past 20 years promoting a booklet called The Colour of Crime, which seeks to prove that black-on-white crime is an epidemic. In conjunction with NPI, American Renaissance forms a small, far-right conference circuit. Taylor is the intellectual leader of something he likes to call race realism, which invokes science to bolster the claim that black and Hispanic people are mentally inferior to white people and East Asians. In a later video I will look at the scientific basis behind such claims, but in this two-parter I'll look at white nationalism itself and Taylor's vision for a racially pure society. Ostensibly Taylor isn't an anti-Semite like many in the far right, but he'll appear on stage with a Jew hater now and again. In fact, he'll happily share a platform with anyone who will give him screen time to promote his ideas about race. Given the opportunity, he'll consort with terrorists, which we'll soon see in a few minutes. Here he is talking to someone called Tara McCarthy, who is a self-styled journalist who takes credit for opening the lid on Hillary Clinton's involvement with a clandestine pedophile ring. She's scheduled to appear with Taylor at the American Renaissance 2017 conference.
The average IQ in sub-Saharan Africa is 65, is that correct?
Well, that's one of the figures that probably is best justified, best researched, yes.
Yeah, which is below what is considered to be mentally retarded in Western countries, really, isn't it?
Well, the parallel that Richard Lynn draws is that that's maybe the mental age of a 7 or 8 year old, and a 7 or 8 year old could be taught to drive a car. A 7 or 8 year old might eventually be taught to repair a car. There are things that people of that mental age can do. You just can't, but there's certain things that they can't do, and you can't expect them to do.
Taylor has an interesting background. He was born in Japan to missionary parents as America was ending its military occupation there.
We were the only round eyes for miles and miles around, and so I went to Japanese public schools, and all my friends were Japanese, and so I speak Japanese. So yes, it was a most unusual upbringing.
In his book, White Identity, Taylor describes becoming racially aware in 1961 when, at the age of 9, he watched a fight between Floyd Patterson and Ingmar Johnson. He says he was distressed to see the white Swedish boxer lose, despite the black one being American. 3 years after graduating from high school, Taylor travelled to West Africa on his own mission. He often tells a story about how he came to understand the benefits of colonization.
Ivory Coast is doing very well. It had a very large presence of Frenchmen who were helping the economy move along. It has since fallen into tribal warfare, and the French have been driven out, and it's a mess. At that time, it was called the Japan of West Africa. It was doing so well. That's at the time when Japan was doing well as well. But as soon as I crossed the border into Liberia, I found that the place was almost a bombed-out wreck. All the roads were full of potholes, the cars were tumbled down, the buildings looked as though they hadn't been maintained for 20 years. And when I got to the capital, Liberia, I asked a young student, I asked him, well, I don't mean to give you any offense, but why is it that compared to Ivory Coast, your country is a mess? He says, oh, that's a very easy question to answer. We didn't have the benefit of being colonized by the French.
Taylor eventually solidified his views on race when, in his 30s, he read a book his father and grandfather both owned copies of. Race and Reason argues that the former Confederate States of America can unite with northern states by focusing on biological inferiority of black people instead of the states' rights. Taylor says diversity brings conflict and white people should pursue their own interests. In a nutshell, he asks white people to unburden themselves of navigating complex race relations by accepting a very simple proposition: that black and Hispanic people are not as intelligent and are more violent than white people, and that they have very little to offer society.
Before black Africans had contact with outsiders, not one African society had invented the wheel. No blacks had a written language or a calendar. No blacks had built a two-story building or a mechanical device or had domesticated any beast of burden. All this suggests a low average level of intelligence.
And there's something else. When people of colour accept their inferior capabilities, this will help race relations, as they will no longer blame white people for their problems.
There's another reason why it would be a huge improvement for our country if we recognized that blacks and Hispanics don't perform at the same level because there are simple differences in ability. It would eliminate a huge chunk of the hatred that blacks have for us. As you know, our country more or less officially encourages them to hate us by telling them they are just as smart as we are, that they work twice as hard, but that we are viciously thwarting them at every turn. America's message, particularly to blacks, is that you can blame all your problems on creepy-ass crackers, as a famous black man once put it.
Taylor wants white people to form their own territory, the so-called homeland, where they will not be held down by mixing with people of other races.
If this were a marriage, it would be called irreconcilable differences, and it would be grounds for divorce. We live in different worlds psychologically, and this makes it impossible for us to live in the same world physically. I think the best tactic is not even to try to talk them out of the idea that whites are uniquely, hopelessly racist. Instead, we should let them wallow in that idea. Let them glory in it. Let them preen themselves on this idea. And then we should propose the next logical step. If we really are hopeless, the only solution is to let us go. Let us go our own way.
Taylor can pinpoint the year when American society began its decline. 1954. When American schools were ordered by the Supreme Court to desegregate. It marked the end of a simpler time for white people and opened the door to inconvenient demands for welfare and equality.
If you go back to 1954, that is the year of the American Supreme Court decision on school desegregation called Brown versus Board of Education. The assumption was that race is a superficial matter that should not be taken into consideration, that children should be mixed, well, without regard to race. It was an ominous first step, but it was just a first step. At that time, in 1954, no one was suggesting that a woman should live on public handouts and have as many children as she likes. Nobody was suggesting, nobody had the idea of passing a law to require that black students perform at the same level as white students. And in 1954, no one was suggesting that homosexuality is just another way to run your family, and of course men should be allowed to marry other men.
The American Civil Rights Movement has a rich history with many stories of people who put themselves on the line to create a better society. But there were also people on the other side, people who organized to oppose desegregation in America. The White Citizens Councils were formed as a direct response to the Brown versus Board of Education decision. They were nicknamed the Uptown Klan. The Citizens Councils and the KKK had a kind of a overlapping symbiotic relationship. They were middle-class and upper-middle-class white people who believed that the end of segregation would mean the end of their culture and their Southern way of life.
Do you foresee any violence in the near future?
If the men in public office do not do their duty
violence is very probable.
It opens up the possibility for non-white domination of the United States.
What direction is your movement going into? What do you see in the future?
I see a political organization based on racial nationalism.
It's a white nostalgia for the Confederacy, which grew out of the rubble after the American Civil War. 150 years after the war, some still regard the federal government as an aggressive force controlled by northern elites, imposing their values on the South.
Here in the United States today, there is a total war being waged against the South. It is being waged by the Obama administration as the last holdout of white Christian culture in the United States. And I'd like to have your thoughts, sir, please, in terms of what is happening right now, that war against the South, that war against that Southern pride, Southern culture that exists, this last holdout that is currently happening in the United States. Thank you.
What's being done to the South, I think, is a symbol. It's only a symbol of what's being done to the entire country. Of course, the South is a villain because of this great war against so-called racism. And because of slavery, that means the entire South is illegitimate and to be despised.
The Lost Cause mythology downplays slavery as a cause of the American Civil War, and instead emphasizes a burgeoning Southern nationalism.
Jefferson Davis was a Mississippi planter who became president of the Confederate States of America. And when he had to leave his home in Mississippi to take up his post with the Confederacy, when he took leave of his slaves, he wept, and his slaves wept. Jefferson Davis's older brother, Joseph Davis, ran what he considered a kind of model plantation in which no slave was disciplined unless discipline was agreed upon by a council of older slaves. Southerners often claim that their treatment of slaves, whom they cared for from birth until old age, was better than the way Yankee capitalists treated the working class. And although we can deplore that as some kind of exaggeration, I'm sure that in some cases it was true.
The film Gone with the Wind is a beautiful illustration of this mythological South, where white people were noble and romantic, and their slaves were happy and treated like family.
You've got to stay for Melanie.
What for? I don't know anything about babies being born.
I knows how to do it. I've done it lots and lots. Let me, doctor. Let me. I can do everything.
Good. Then I'll rely on you to help us.
Yes, doctor.
Ashley's fighting in the field.
The Citizens' Councils met openly to campaign against integration and sought economic and political means to thwart the progress of the civil rights movement. For some time, desegregation was a sizable political wedge issue. The Mississippi Citizens Council boasted a membership of 75,000 people. Citizens Council luminary Asa Carter served as a speechwriter for the Alabama Governor George Wallace and wrote his infamous Segregation Forever speech.
Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
They printed newsletters in which we can glean much about the segregationist mindset. Their preoccupations are eerily familiar. As the southern states integrated, white citizens, racist though they might have been, accepted the new reality of living shoulder to shoulder with their black compatriots.
We met together in the faculty room and we felt defeated. We felt as if we'd waved the flag of surrender, and we didn't want to wave a flag of surrender. We didn't want to admit that we couldn't control the situation. Now, I don't think anybody can say enough concerning the courage of the Negro students themselves, who were willing to face persecution in their hometown to get an education. The majority of students, and I do mean the majority, have undergone this crisis with great courage and faced it intelligently, trying to be courteous and helpful at all times. And I think these students have grown up a little bit as a result of it.
The kinds of campaigns the Citizens' Councils used to run looked increasingly ridiculous. Governor Wallace, who 8 years previously had breathed fiery racial populism, looked at ease with an integrated Alabama. The Democratic Party increasingly became a forum for civil rights. The Republican Party adopted something called the Southern Strategy, in which they would appeal to racist voters without looking racist themselves. Here's Republican Chairman Lee Atwater describing the Southern Strategy quite succinctly.
Yeah, now y'all aren't quoting me on this. All right, I won't hear. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger nigger.
In 1988, the Citizens' Councils were formed into a successor organisation, the Council of Conservative Citizens. The CFCC lobbied paleo-conservative politicians like Mike Huckabee and Pat Buchanan, and promoted implicitly racial policies. Things like racial profiling by police, stricter sentencing, mass incarceration, preventing businesses from hiring people with convictions, ending affirmative action.
That the New Century Foundation, which publishes American Renaissance, recently issued. The report was called The Color of Crime. Here is a copy of it, and we released it last month. Dare I say it? Someone in Duluth might decide, well, wait a minute, maybe we don't have a gun problem. Maybe we have a minority problem.
A lot of people say, well, why do you even have an organization? Well, what's good is it if everybody knows what the problem is, but there's no way to activate them to do something effectively. And you got to keep in mind two truisms. One, as Tip O'Neill so astutely put it, all politics is local. Secondly, the vast majority of politicians on the left, right, and center are really political prostitutes. They're not ideologues at all. And if they think that we're strong enough to help them or hurt them worse than the other side or more than the other side, and that's usually the news media, they will then pander to us.
In 2015, Gordon Baum's truism about the media was put to the test. The lone wolf terrorist, Dylan Roof, murdered 9 people as they sat in prayer at the Mother Emanuel, an historically black church in Charleston, South Carolina. In his manifesto, Roof writes of beginning his radicalization on the Council of Conservative Citizens website. Politicians flew into a blind panic, checking their accounts and refunding donations made to them by the organization. And the CFCC melted under the glare of the media and took their website offline.
After decades, right? I mean, that group was founded right after Brown v. Board. Everybody knew who they were, and over and over and over again, for decades, conservative politicians still allied themselves with that group. Even though everybody knew who they were, they've never hidden their light under a bushel. They've been an overtly racist group with ties to the terror that was the backlash against the civil rights movement in this country.
But there was one person willing to stump for the segregationists. Guess who?
Roof wrote, quote, "There were pages upon pages of these brutal black-on-white murders. I was in disbelief. At this moment, I realized that something was very wrong." Roof's stepmother said he had been affected by internet evil. So doesn't your organization bear some responsibility for what Roof was thinking?
No. He did not get inspiration from the council's website. He got information.
But again, I want to get to the thinking of this group and the website. The CFCC website has compared the late pop star Michael Jackson to an ape and has referred to black people as a retrograde species of humanity. Why shouldn't somebody who's going to your website and believes this stuff, why shouldn't we be able to predict that they might cause violence against African Americans?
I don't endorse that kind of language. I'm here to talk about the group, the Council of Conservative Citizens, and what association it might have had.
Then, Mr. Taylor, why did it sit on your website for so many years?
That goes back many, many years.
Here's Taylor on a neo-Nazi podcast talking about his desire to interview Dylan Roof. seeing the terrorism as an amazing opportunity to promote their shared values.
I've thought about trying to approach the people who hold him and see if I could interview him.
That's right. We have the same. Yeah, the same.
Yes, we've had. Have you attempted to do that though?
No, not yet. Where I forget exactly where he was held now, but it's actually the cell next to the police officer that actually shot a black man in Charleston as well. I forget. Maybe you recall his name.
Yes, I remember that incident. I don't remember. Is that the fellow who shot the guy in the back?
I believe so. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
They're cellmates, or door neighbors, basically.
Yes. Yeah. For heaven's sakes, they're cellmates. Well, no, I would love to be able to interview Dylann Roof. I've made no attempt to do so.
Yeah.
I think about it and then I don't get around to it. I don't know what the procedure is, but there will be an awful lot about Dylann Roof. He will rise from the media silence in the most thunderous way when he is put on trial.
Dylann Roof was interviewed, though, by the FBI.
What I did is so minuscule to what they're doing to white people every day.
Dylan, when you said you had to do this, so basically what you're...
I had to do it because nobody else is going to do it. Nobody else is brave enough to do anything about it. Back in the late 80s and the early 90s, we had skinheads and stuff like that. There's no skinheads left. There's no KKK. KKK never did anything anyway.
The photos Roof put on the internet feature him visiting old Confederacy landmarks, brandishing Confederate battle flags, and desecrating the flag of the United States. This generated enough political will for South Carolina to transfer the Confederate flag from their state capital to a museum. And that's where the story ends for many Americans. But Dylann Roof displayed two other flags in his photos, which received scant press scrutiny, but lead us into another story about how the American far-right wants society to be ordered in the future. So please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my next video, which explores what Jared Taylor's white homeland will look like and how he plans to get there.